Dispense with.
Without objection.
As I mentioned yesterday, senators had the chance to hear directly from Ukraine's President Zelensky over the weekend. He and his constituents, the brave people of Ukraine, have won the hearts and minds of all of us all across the world. Their pain, of course, is Putin's fault. But as I and others warned for weeks before the invasion, that pain has been compounded by the West's hesitation and sluggishness in helping Ukraine prepare for this onslaught, which we could all see coming. Crisis was not only foreseeable, it was, in fact, foreseen. Republicans spent months urging President Biden to put more lethal aid in Ukrainian hands before Russian invasion made those deliveries much more difficult. We urged the administration to reinforce our eastern flank NATO partners before Putin escalated his war against Ukraine, rather than playing catch-up. We called for heavier sanctions before Putin had fully committed his forces and his pride. We warned repeatedly that the Biden administration must not let these actions be slowed down to the speed of bureaucracy. But that is, of course, what happened. As President Zelensky himself said publicly last week, while he appreciates all the Western help, much of it is ultimately arriving too late. The Biden administration is now finally doing many of the things they slow-walked months ago as too provocative or too escalatory, providing stingers, sharing intelligence, deploying more forces to NATO's eastern flank, finally getting out of the way of sanctioning Nord Stream 2. Now, as supplies dwindle and safe resupply and transit corridors narrow, friends of Ukraine will have to work even harder to help the citizens and their government stay in the fight. It's been obvious for some time that Ukraine would benefit from receiving Soviet-era aircraft and air defense systems from our eastern flank NATO partners who still maintain inventories of such weapons. The U.S. can help these allies worried about giving up such capabilities by helping to backfill with American-made and NATO standard weapons. I understand the administration may be finally coming around to support this, but again, at the stately pace of bureaucracy. This needs to get done, and get done yesterday, Mr. President. Meanwhile, the Congress is acting. That includes additional security assistance funding for Ukraine and for our eastern flank NATO allies in the supplemental appropriations bill, along with funding for loan guarantees to help eastern flank countries buy American weapons to shore up our collective defenses. I appreciate the Democratic leader working in good faith to accommodate my request that the funding bill significantly increase the security assistance drawdown fund available to the President and to backfill our DoD stockpiles that are helping our friends in harm's way. I hope we finalize those steps soon. This supplemental is urgent, but the fact is the White House has thus far taken steps that limit their own options and made them miss the window to provide impactful assistance. This administration not only reportedly refused a request prior to the conflict to increase the number of U.S. military trainers in the country, but moved the advisors we had to the far west of the country and then pulled them from the country entirely, like they also pulled out our entire diplomatic mission. These non-combat advisors could have helped facilitate more shipments of weapons to the field, more training to teach Ukrainians how to use them. They could have laid important logistical groundwork to ensure weapons could continue to flow through the front lines after the conflict began. In area after area, the record shows the Biden administration pulled their punches, even though everyone knew that the war was coming. And even so, the Ukrainians are mounting an incredible and brave resistance. Imagine where these brave people might be now if the administration moved at the speed of necessity rather than the snail's pace of bureaucracy. Now we must commit to keep lethal aid flowing. We have to continue strengthening NATO and deepening our security partnerships and interoperability with other European partners. We need to encourage more commitments, like the German Chancellor's recent announcement that they will massively step up their investment in their own defense and in NATO. And perhaps most important of all, we cannot have Washington politicians in the business of shortchanging our own defense spending at the very time when we are pleading with Western Europe to increase theirs. We have to lead by example and make the kind of robust investments needed for long-term competition with Russia and China. In the meantime, the sobering reality is that Ukraine is very likely to see more and escalating brutality in the days and the weeks ahead. The world remembers the butchery in Grozny and the cold-blooded targeting in Aleppo. And the world will remember the moment as Russia sinks six conscripts on Ukrainian civilians and arrests its own people when they object. For all of the Kremlin's lies about Ukraine, about how it's supposedly just an extension of Russia and its people are really Russians, we now know for certain that Russians and Ukrainians do have, in fact, at least one thing in common. Vladimir Putin considers their lives equally disposable. Now, on a related matter, the price of gas jumped more in the past week than any week on record.